my name is Whitney Sederberg and I'm from Olympia High School. Today I'll be performing the following informative speech for the 2021 Washington State Individual Events Tournament. Do you remember the good old days when things were simpler? Back when good work ethic was actually rewarded, or back when there were only 4 fashion seasons a year instead of 52? It used to take companies about 2 years to fully design and produce a new line of clothing. But the fast fashion business model copies trends right off the runway and rushes production in order to feed our growing demand for new clothing. Fast fashion is a fascinating phenomenon that's built up its own capital in a surprisingly short amount of time. No, speed is what it's all about. Today, we'll be crashing through a course faster than fast fashion took over the world. First, examining the positive feedback loop our mind has collaborated with fast fashion to make. Then we'll take a look at how that mindset has allowed everyone here to shamelessly support slavery. And finally, the absolutely devastating environmental impact that textiles have. You may be able to skip the straw, but I'll give you some tips on avoiding public indecency. First, where it all begins. The positive feedback loop is an interesting concept because although it's technically considered positive, this one is making the world worse and worse. In order for a positive feedback loop to be functional, the items going in and out must be mutually helping each other to increase all-around production. Cheap shopping has created a new modern positive feedback loop. The item going in is money and the degradation of the human mind, and the item coming out in return is a very brief rush of dopamine. Dopamine is one of the chemicals in our brain that helps regulate movement, attention, hearing, and emotional responses. More importantly though, it creates a sort of reward system in your brain, with the chemical reaction being the incentive. This means that you can actually become addicted to shopping because of the dopamine that you get from it. And shopping delivers a surprisingly high amount of dopamine. So much so that some studies have shown people can reach a real physical high while shopping. So it's sort of like drugs. And just like drugs, people will often turn right back to shopping in order to gain more of that sweet dopamine, training our minds that happiness is associated with money rather than things like actual happiness. Quoted from CBC Marketplace, our brain chemistry makes it difficult to resist a good deal or low prices. But the funny thing is, the poor quality of fast fashion items makes them deteriorate more quickly, meaning that we actually spend more money in the long run by taking these cheaper deals. We've created this problem in our society that we're feeding into with fast fashion, not only by normalizing easy satisfaction, but by normalizing slavery. Yes, pretty much everyone knows that most of what you and I are wearing right now had some kind of involvement with slavery. But if we all know how bad this is, then why do we still feed into it? In the 80s, the average American bought 12 new articles of clothing every year. But now, the average American buys 68 new articles of clothing every year. And on top of that, compared to 20 years ago, we're only keeping what we buy for about half as long. This new consumption mindset that we have is making us buy way too many clothes. The big suppliers are struggling to keep up with the intense demand that the people have created. So in order to keep this not very sustainable business model running, pretty much every large clothing company with affordable prices has had no choice but to turn to slavery and incredibly low wages. And yes, every single company here has well-known ties to slavery and exploitation. It almost seems unavoidable, doesn't it? Companies that don't use slavery price their items at incredibly high prices to compensate for the morals they've somehow acquired in the 21st century. But just how bad are these companies here? Let's take a quick look at Nike. Because although many sports industries rely on their products, Nike relies on slave labor to make those products, meaning that many sports industries rely on slave labor to function. This has been an ongoing issue for years that the Nike CEO simply refuses to even acknowledge. A lot of their workers live in 9x9 apartments with 10 to 15 people sharing a toilet that usually feeds out into the streets, living off $1.25 a day for working upwards of 15 hours a day. And these are just the factory workers. People who work in fields or mines often don't get paid at all. Keep in mind that the very unlivable minimum wage in Washington is $13.50 an hour, but these people are working longer for less. Although we could just try to not buy items made in other countries, garments that say Made in USA can still use slavery. Places like Guam and economic territories all have much more relaxed labor laws and are still technically part of the United States. At this point, one might ask what the point of even trying to avoid slavery is if it's unavoidable. But if we had that same doomsday attitude about climate change, where would we be right now? Speaking of climate change, although I do commend our most recent generation for their efforts to stay woke and sustainable, buying a shirt that says "Save the bees, plant more trees, and clean the seas" doesn't actually do anything to help the environment. What have you been told about climate change and pollution? That plastic straws are the devil and using a plastic bag will condemn you? Well, what if I told you that, according to the Ministry of Food and Environment of Denmark, the carbon emissions made to create a reusable cotton bag far outweigh those of a plastic bag. This is not only because textiles are fundamentally more complex, but because cheap textiles are largely made of plastic. Materials like polyurethane are all 98% plastic or more. This means that by buying a shirt that says "Skip a straw, save a turtle," you'd be doing the equivalent of dumping tens of thousands of straws into the Pacific Ocean. In 2018, according to Business Insider, fast fashion made more carbon emissions than international flights and maritime shipping combined. Now, I'm not telling you to start going out of your way to use plastic straws instead of the metal ones you may already own, but I'm saying that if you really want to make a difference, then the Climate Action Club at my school shouldn't be printing t-shirts telling you to save the earth. Buy less stuff and wear your clothes longer. Okay, so clothes are bad. But if you want to get rid of yours, what do you do with them? You decide what sparks joy and what doesn't and then toss that in the trash? No, that's bad for the earth. Do you donate your excess textiles to people in need? The clothing deficit myth is very widespread, but the truth is, there's way more clothes in this world than people who want them. When your items are donated to places like Salvation Army or Goodwill, items that can't be resold are usually shipped overseas, most often to South America or Africa, where they're either resold again or burnt. This means that even donating clothes can let them end up devastating the environment because there's simply no good way to dispose of unwanted clothing. Many fast fashion stores like H&M or Zara will pretend that there is by taking your used clothes in exchange for a coupon. But like many of their other ploys, this too is a scam. H&M claims that they will, quote, literally turn your old clothes into new ones. But according to the CDC, there just isn't the technology to do that. Many companies will do something called greenwashing, which is giving their clothes vague terms with no legal definition in order to deceive you into thinking that they're environmentally and socially conscious. But the truth is, by saying that their clothing is eco-friendly or made sustainably, they're not actually saying anything, because you can't hold a company liable for something that has no legal definition. Now, I know I've sort of given you a doomsday prep seminar on fast fashion, but the truth is, there is something that we individually can do to help. But if this thing that's destroying the planet can't be resold, donated, or burnt, what can we do? Well, even if there was a way to donate all old clothing, or to literally make new clothes out of your old ones, it won't fix the problem. I know we've been discussing these solutions for the past 8 minutes, but the truth is, the fast fashion business model is fundamentally flawed. Fast fashion is something that's found a lot of success in the modern age, and their companies are blowing other ones out of the water in such a way they might not ever be able to catch up, unless they permanently change their business model. But we can choose not to support that business model. Even if we individually can't change the problem at its root, there is something we can do, and it's so simple. Just buy less stuff. You don't need 68 new pieces of clothing every year. According to Patriot Act, by wearing your clothes for just 9 months longer, you're reducing your carbon footprint for that item by 30%. This is a symptom of many other issues with our world, capitalism, consumerism. But I hope that having something to do gives you hope. Because things just aren't simple anymore like they were in the good old days. They're a bit more complicated now. But that's not exclusively a bad thing. There's so much more research for you and me and everyone to do after this, but for now, to those who can, we can take the step to start choosing how we spend our money in a way that's better for us mentally, socially, and environmentally. Thank you.